Tonight, we will explore a fascinating journey through one of history's darkest and most transformative periods, the Black Death and the experience of surviving this devastating plague. Before you settle in, please like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this content. Also, share in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who joins us from around the world. Now dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you have just awakened in Europe in the year 1347. The morning air is crisp as you open your eyes, stretching on your straw-filled mattress. You are not in a private bedroom as you might be accustomed to. You are in a single-room cottage with the rest of your family. The walls are constructed of wattle and daub, a wooden frame filled with a mixture of mud, clay, and straw. It is quite effective at retaining warmth, yet the thatched roof occasionally leaks during heavy rains. As you ascend, your nose is filled with familiar scents: the smoky aroma of last night's hearthfire, the earthy smell of the dirt floor, and the distinct tang of unwashed bodies. Bathing is infrequent in medieval times, and this lack of awareness is unnoticed as everyone smells nearly identical. Your stomach growls with hunger. If you are fortunate, there might be some leftover bread from yesterday, though it is likely rock hard now. You could soften it in some ale. Yes, even children drink weak ale in these times. It is often safer than water, which can make you terribly ill if drawn from a contaminated source. Outside your small cottage, the village is already awakening. You hear the distant lowing of cattle, the clucking of chickens, and the calls of your neighbors as they start their daily tasks. Many inhabitants here are peasants who till the land, either as free tenants paying rent to the local lord, or as serfs obligated to the land and required to provide labor services. Life possesses a predictable rhythm in your medieval village. The days are marked by the sun's passage, the weeks by the church bells summoning you to mass, and the years by the turning seasons and the cycle of planting and harvesting. Life is certainly difficult, yet it is the only existence you have ever known. What remains unknown to you, and what no one in Europe yet comprehends, is that everything is about to change. A shadow is creeping across the continent, one that will transform society in ways unmatched by war or famine. The first murmurs reach your village through a traveling merchant. He brings exotic goods from afar, silks from the east, spices from distant lands. But this time, he brings something else: stories. Terrifying accounts of a plague that has ravaged cities along trade routes. He says people are dying by the thousands, afflicted by a mysterious illness that causes fever, painful swellings, and near-certain death. Some villagers pray and cross themselves. Others dismiss the stories as exaggeration, as alarming rumors often outpace truth. The merchant moves on, and for a time life continues as normal. Yet the rumors continue, becoming more frequent and terrifying with every passing month. By autumn, the whispers have escalated into cries of alarm. The sickness has spread to the Mediterranean ports of Europe: Messina, Marseille, Venice. They report that ships have arrived in harbors filled only with corpses, the sailors having perished during their voyage. "God, save us all," his mother murmurs upon hearing the news, making the sign of the cross. In your village, people strive to prepare, though the nature of the threat remains unknown. Some stockpile food, others focus on prayer for divine protection. The local healer collects herbs and remedies, yet no one knows if they will be effective against this unknown affliction. The initial cases arrive in your region during the cold months of winter. A nearby village, just a half-day's walk away, reports several sudden deaths. The victims experienced high fevers, complained of severe thirst, and developed unusual black swellings in their armpits and groins. Few survived beyond 3 days after symptoms appeared. The village elders convened to deliberate a course of action. Some advocated for sealing the village from outsiders, while others insisted trade and communication persist. Ultimately, life continued, infused with a new sense of dread. One crisp morning, a young mill worker failed to report for his duties. Upon investigation, they found him burning with fever, drenched in sweat, and his neck swollen with a painful mass the size of a hen's egg. The plague had arrived in the village. This ushered in a time of horror beyond imagination as the sickness spread with terrifying speed. One day healthy, the next feverish, and by the third day often dead. The black buboes that give the disease its name, the Black Death, are beyond description in their pain. Some victims cough blood, indicating the disease has reached their lungs, and these unfortunate souls rarely survive more than a day or two. Some believe it is a punishment from God, others suggest self-flagellation for their sins. Others claim the bad air, carrying foul miasma, is dispelled by carrying posies of flowers to ward off the disease. Some darkly mutter that the Jews poison the wells. Though your village has no Jewish residents, these accusations are nonsensical. The truth, unknown to anyone in the 14th century, is that the Black Death was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which travels in fleas that ride on rats' backs. These rodents, stowaways on ships and constant companions in medieval towns and villages, have inadvertently carried death across continents. When an infected flea bites a human, it regurgitates bacteria into the wound. These bacteria multiply rapidly, often causing swelling in the lymph nodes, those painful buboes. If the bacteria reach the lungs, they cause pneumonic plague, which spreads directly from person to person through coughing and breathing. Yet this is unknown to many. What is known is that people are dying, and no one can halt it. Your village, like thousands elsewhere in Europe, is ravaged by the plague. The church bells, once marking time and summoning prayer, now incessantly toll for the deceased. Eventually deaths accumulate beyond announcement, and the bells fall silent. The dead are buried hastily, without ceremony. The elaborate funeral rites that once marked a person's passage from this world to the next are gone. Bodies are now gathered on carts and transported to mass graves. Families devastated by multiple deaths have no one left to bury their dead, and bodies may remain in homes for days until neighbors or parish officials remove them. Fear alters interpersonal behavior. Those with healthy family members may bar their doors to visitors, while those with sick relatives are often avoided. Some flee to the countryside, hoping distance will shield them from the disease. Others turn to religion with renewed fervor, moving through streets while flagellating themselves to appease what they believe is divine wrath. The priests, who should offer comfort, are themselves dying in alarming numbers. Their duties require them to administer last rites to the dying, constantly exposing them to contagion. Many flee, abandoning their flocks during this time of greatest need. Those who remain often succumb to the disease themselves. Your family has been fortunate thus far. Though the plague rages, your immediate household remains untouched. Stories of entire families wiped out in neighboring villages, of orphaned children dying soon after, and of lovers separated by death just hours after pledging devotion have reached you. Yet your luck cannot endure in a world where the Black Death claims 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. One morning your younger brother complains of illness. By midday, he is burning with fever. By evening, the telltale swelling appears at his neck, and you understand the implications. Your mother cares for him constantly, bathing his fevered forehead with cool cloths, trying to get him to drink small sips of water or weak ale. Your father suggests taking him to the monastery where monks heal the sick. However, everyone knows these monasteries are overrun, with many of the brothers themselves victims of the plague. For 3 days, your brother's condition deteriorates. The boo enlarges, shifting from angry red to black. His breathing grows labored, and he cries out in pain and delirium. You alternate sitting with him, though fear compels you to maintain distance. On the 4th day, an unexpected event occurs. While most plague victims deteriorate and die at this stage, your brother's fever breaks. He is weak, terribly so, yet alert. The boo persists, but it has softened slightly, and over the following days it ruptures and drains. A grim yet hopeful sign, your brother is among the few to survive the Black Death. The reason for his survival remains unknown, but modern science later revealed that certain individuals possess a genetic mutation, Delta 32, which confers some protection against the plague bacterium. This mutation alters the CCR5 protein on white blood cell surfaces, hindering the bacteria's ability to enter and commandeer immune cells. Your brother might carry this mutation, as others in your family do. This genetic anomaly, a random occurrence, could offer certain families and individuals a chance against the deadliest pandemic in human history. Surprisingly, centuries later, scientists would find this same mutation also offers immunity against another fatal illness, HIV, the cause of AIDS. The Black Death selection for survivors with this genetic trait inadvertently protected some of their descendants from a disease that would not emerge for another 6 centuries. However, this is a story for another time. For now, your family celebrates your brother's recovery as a miracle. Not everyone is so fortunate. As weeks pass, the plague continues its deadly work. Your village, once home to perhaps 200 souls, now sees fewer than 100 fields left untended, as those who would work them are either dead or consumed by caring for the sick or burying the dead. The lord of the manor, residing in a stone house on the hill overlooking the village, has lost his wife and 2 of his children. Even wealth and privilege offer no defense against the plague. Strangely, some people appear immune to the pestilence despite constant exposure. The village gravedigger, an unsavory character who robs the dead before burying them, handles plague-ridden corpses daily, yet shows no symptoms. A midwife who treats the sick when not delivering babies also remains healthy despite her dangerous work. Like your brother, they might possess genetic protection, though medieval people would attribute their survival to divine intervention or perhaps suspicious dealings with dark forces. Food scarcity ensues as the harvest is ignored and trade declines. The cost of necessities rises, while remedies like specific herbs, exotic treatments, and religious relics become prohibitively expensive if they exist. As winter nears, the plague naturally recedes, fleas become less active in the cold, and rats remain near their nests. For a brief moment, hope exists that the worst is over. However, the Black Death persists. It merely withdraws to reappear with spring's warmth, claiming new lives from survivors of the initial wave. Over the following 4 years, from 1347 to 1351, successive plague outbreaks will ravage Europe, resulting in the deaths of between 75 and 200 million people, perhaps half the continent's populace. The world emerging from this disaster will be fundamentally altered. The massive population decline will disrupt the feudal system, increasing the value of labor and shifting power dynamics between peasants and nobility. Religious authority will be questioned as people wonder why their prayers went unanswered and why so many priests abandoned their duties. Medical knowledge, based largely on ancient texts and superstition, will be challenged by the plague's defiance of traditional treatments. For survivors, such as your brother, the gravedigger, and the midwife, life will never resemble what it was. They are fortunate, yet they bear the weight of survival in a world of loss. They will rebuild societies, renegotiate their ties with authority, and slowly create a post-plague world that, in some way, steers Europe toward modernity. But that narrative is for another time. As you drift to sleep, imagine yourself a medieval survivor, watching the first stars emerge in the evening sky above your village. The plague has passed, at least for now. You have endured humanity's darkest hour. Though you don't yet know it, you stand on the brink of a new world born from the old's ruins. The gentle rhythm of your breath blends with the night sounds outside. A distant dog bark, leaves rustle in a gentle breeze. Despite unimaginable loss and suffering, life persists. This simple fact may be the Black Death's most crucial lesson: humanity's remarkable ability to endure, adapt, and continue. The morning after your brother's miraculous recovery brings a strange mix of emotions. Relief washes over you, yet it is tinged with the unfamiliar. A feeling of wonder why your family survived when so many others perished. This strange survivor's guilt, this sense of unworthiness amidst widespread suffering, haunts many who experience catastrophes. Your brother is weak but watchful. His eyes are clear for the first time in days. The drained mark at his neck has left an ugly scar that will define him forever, a lasting reminder of his near-death experience. Yet a scar is vastly better than a grave, and your family treats each day of his recovery as the gift it truly is. "Why did I live when so many died?" he asks one evening, his voice still raspy from illness. Your mother, lighting a rush candle as darkness falls, pauses before answering. "Yo, God's will," she says simply, though her tone suggests she's not entirely convinced. The truth, which no one in the 14th century could possibly comprehend, is far more complex. Throughout history, infectious diseases have driven natural selection. Individuals with genetic defenses against pathogens survive better and pass these traits to succeeding generations. The Black Death stands as a dramatic illustration of this process. Within your brother's cells, and possibly yours, resides a genetic mutation that modifies the CCR5 protein on white blood cell surfaces. This Delta 32 mutation shortens the protein, impeding the plague bacterium's entry and hijacking of immune cells. One copy offers partial protection, while 2 copies provide significant resistance to the disease. This is a genetic lottery, and your brother may possess a winning trait, but the price of this evolutionary advantage is measured in millions of lives. Those lacking the protective mutation perished in the Black Death. As your brother recovers, venturing out for the first time since his sickness, you observe the village's dramatic transformation. Gardens, once carefully kept, now grow wild. Homes stand vacant, their occupants dead or gone. The sounds of daily labor, the blacksmith's hammer, the weaver's loom, the miller's wheel are muffled or gone. Yet amidst this ruin, signs of resilience appear. A market day is organized, smaller than previously, yet vibrant with the energy of survivors determined to endure. Farmers from outlying regions bring their harvested produce. A traveling merchant, bolder or more reckless than most, arrives with salt, spices, and reports from afar. The news is universal, devastation followed by tentative recovery. No place is untouched, though some have endured greater suffering than others. Cities suffering from overcrowding and poor sanitation were hit particularly hard. Some small, isolated mountain or forest villages fared better, though few escaped completely. In your region, perhaps half the population perished. In some areas, the loss was even greater. The merchant recounts ghost towns devoid of life, monasteries where every monk is dead in his cell, and noble families utterly erased, their estates airless. Yet, he also speaks of places where life persists normally, communities uniting to aid orphans and widows, and unexpected kindness amid dire suffering. One particular story commands your attention. In a village similar to yours, Elizabeth lost her husband and 6 children to the plague within a single week. She dragged each of their bodies to a hillside behind their home and buried them herself, one by one. Yet somehow, despite this close contact with the disease, Elizabeth never fell ill. Like your brother and the village gravedigger, she seemed to have some natural immunity. That same genetic defense that modern science would eventually discover. The merchant whispered that she was a witch, though no one was near to hear. How else could she interact with the dead and the living? Some wished to drown her in the pond, but many were content with having someone willing to bury their dead. Such rumors are frequent in these desperate times. Survivors who defy the odds, especially women living alone or those with peculiar habits or appearances, are often suspected of dark activities. Fear and superstition thrive with the plague, sometimes taking victims of their own. Your father, who has heard the merchant's stories, shakes his head. There is no witchcraft in survival, he insists firmly. Some are simply stronger against the sickness, like my son. He places a proud hand on your brother's shoulder. The merchant nods willingly, always careful not to contradict a potential customer. Indeed, in every village, there are those the plague cannot reach. God's chosen, perhaps, as winter arrives, bringing bitter cold and early darkness, your village settles into a new routine. There are fewer mouths to feed, so food stores will last longer than usual, a small mercy. Yet there are also fewer hands to chop wood, repair homes, care for livestock, and perform the 100 daily tasks necessary for survival in medieval times. This labor shortage subtly, yet significantly alters the dynamic between peasants and the nobility. Your father, a skilled carpenter, is suddenly highly sought after. The lord of the manor, instead of merely commanding service, now negotiates, offering improved terms for urgent repairs to the manor house. He offered me a silver penny for 3 days of work, your father revealed to your mother one evening, his voice laced with astonishment, along with a side of bacon. Such wages would have been unthinkable before the plague. But with half the craftsmen in the region dead, those who survive find their skills valued as never before. Similar changes ripple through all levels of society. Farm laborers, once abundant and easily replaced, now command higher wages for their work. Household servants, especially those with experience running a large home, find themselves sought after by noble families whose staff have been decimated by disease. Women also discover new opportunities in this reorganized world. Widows who might have remarried quickly now frequently choose to maintain their independence, operating the businesses left by deceased husbands. Guild restrictions that once barred women from certain professions are informally eased due to necessity. A woman in a nearby village takes over her husband's blacksmith forge, shocking traditionalists but offering an indispensable service no one else can supply. For serfs, they were legally tied to the land they cultivated. The plague introduced unprecedented mobility. Many lords, desperate to maintain agricultural output, offered freedom to serfs willing to remain and work. Others chose to depart, moving to towns or other areas offering improved conditions. With so many dead, the fear of being forced back lessened, making the enforcement of such restrictions increasingly challenging. These transformations do not all occur instantly. While the feudal system that structured European society for centuries will not collapse instantly, the seeds of change are sown in these early post-plague years and will mature over the coming decades. Regarding your family, you adapt to the new reality as you can. Your brother recovers his strength, though he is more easily fatigued than before. Your father finds his carpentry skills highly sought after, bringing home greater earnings than he has ever achieved. Your mother receives laundry from the manor. This work is now better compensated due to a shortage of willing workers. You discover opportunities that would not have existed previously. The parish priest, one of the few clergy who survived the worst of the plague without dying or fleeing, requires assistance in maintaining church records. With a basic literacy unusual for a peasant child, imparted by your mother, who once served in a noble household, you are suited for the task. Spring brings both hope and fear. Warming weather revitalizes nature. Crops sprout, wildflowers bloom, and birds return. Yet this warmth also creates conditions for plague to resurge. New cases emerge by early summer, a less devastating second wave due to fewer hosts and potential genetic resistance among survivors. Still, every new death reopens barely healed communal wounds. One afternoon, while assisting the priest in updating the parish death register, a grimly long document, you ask a troubling question. Father, why did God send the plague? The priest, an older man whose face is etched with exhaustion, pauses before replying. Some claim it is punishment for sin, he states. Others argue it is a test of faith. The Pope himself has called for prayer and penance to end the scourge. He dips his quill in ink, recording another name. Yet I have witnessed the most devout suffer in agony, while notorious sinners remain untouched. I have prayed by the bedsides of innocent children as the plague swept through them. He sighs heavily. Perhaps it is not for us to grasp God's design. This crisis of faith is mirrored in communities throughout Europe. The plague contradicts medieval religious notions. If it is divine wrath, why does it afflict the virtuous and the wicked equally? If prayer and penance are the cure, why do devoted monasteries experience some of the highest death rates? The Church's authority, once nearly absolute over earthly misfortune, is showing cracks that will widen over centuries. Medical knowledge faces similar challenges. Physicians from prestigious universities are no more effective against plague than village healers. Their complex theories, rooted in bodily humors and celestial alignments, cannot account for differential recovery and mortality. They also fail to explain why some communities face greater suffering than others. While some physicians courageously treat the ill, sometimes at personal risk, others evacuate immediately upon outbreak, choosing self-preservation over professional obligation. Those who remained commonly wore distinctive protective attire, long robes coated in wax, gloves, and a mask shaped like a bird's beak filled with herbs and spices, thought to purify the air. This peculiar outfit, which would later become iconic during plague outbreaks, offered little defense against the true source of infection. Lacking effective official remedies, communities developed their own countermeasures to the plague. Some are rooted in superstition, involving carrying talismans, reciting charms, or avoiding black cats and people with red hair. Others possess surprising practical utility, such as isolating the sick, burning the possessions of plague victims, and maintaining hygiene. While none provide absolute defense, these community-developed methods occasionally aid in limiting contagion. Your village employs several such measures. Houses afflicted by plague are marked with white crosses on their doors. Visitors from outside the village are required to wait 3 days in a designated hut before entry, ensuring they display no signs of disease. The dead are buried swiftly and their possessions are burned with minimal ceremony. While these precautions offer some aid, they cannot completely halt the plague. By midsummer, your village has lost another dozen people in the second wave, a severe blow to a community already weakened by the first outbreak. One victim is the Lord of the Manor himself, a man in his 50s who survived the first wave but succumbed to the second. His death causes ripples of consequence throughout the local social hierarchy. His son, barely 20 and newly returned from university in Paris, inherits the manor and its lands. This new lord, young and influenced by novel ideas from his education, adopts a different approach to managing the estate than his father did. Acknowledging labor scarcity and shifting power dynamics, he provides improved terms to tenant farmers. Those who remain and work are granted freedom and better rents. Individuals with specialized skills, such as your father, receive privileges reserved for higher social ranks. Not all nobles readily adjust to this new reality. In adjacent territories, some lords strive to enforce ancient limitations more severely, preventing peasants from departing and punishing those who seek increased wages, employing force to sustain the established hierarchy. These endeavors seldom endure. Peasants inevitably depart, pursuing superior conditions elsewhere. With plentiful land and a lack of labor, they encounter no deficit of prospects. The plague's second wave finally subsides with the arrival of autumn. Your village has survived, lessened, yet remains whole. Of the original 200 residents, perhaps 90 remain. Fields were consolidated, prioritizing the most fertile land for cultivation. Houses stood empty, their timbers and thatch were gradually scavenged for other uses, yet life possesses a remarkable capacity to normalize even after catastrophe. Children played in the village square once more. The rhythms of agricultural life, planting, tending, harvesting, continued, adapted to the reduced workforce. Weddings occurred and babies were born. Commerce resumed. On a clear autumn day, a surprising visitor arrived in the village, a mason who had left years earlier to seek work in the cities. He had built a good life in Florence, working on the magnificent cathedral there. But when the plague struck, it devastated the city worse than any rural area. He said, "I watched half of Florence die," his eyes haunted by memories. The rich fled to their country estates, but the poor had nowhere to go. Bodies were piled in the streets faster than they could be buried. I survived by God's grace. After the worst had passed, work on the cathedral ceased. With so many dead, priorities shifted to essential rebuilding. The mason, lacking steady employment, chose to return to his birthplace. This story is not unique throughout Europe. The plague caused a temporary reversal of the long-term trend of urbanization. Cities with their dense populations are ideal environments for disease. Those who survive often migrate to the countryside, seeking refuge in open spaces and smaller communities. This urban departure yields unforeseen advantages for rural villages such as yours. People return equipped with novel skills, fresh ideas, and new viewpoints acquired from urban life. They share stories of diverse lifestyles, technological advancements, and political systems distinct from the feudal structure of rural regions. For example, the mason describes how Florence was governed not by a hereditary noble, but by elected officials from the merchant class. He discusses mechanical clocks that segment the day into exact hours, water systems that supply clean water to the city, and banking methods that enable trade over long distances. These concepts thrive in communities already challenging established authorities and customs. The plague has fractured the medieval worldview. Through these cracks, new possibilities emerge. Life continues in this altered landscape for you and your family. Your brother fully recovered despite the plague's scars, apprentices to the returned mason, learning a skilled craft that ensures him a secure future in a world valuing such skills. Your father's carpentry still keeps the family comfortable, his services now commanding wages unimaginable before the plague. Your mother no longer handles laundry, instead focusing on an herb garden that yields highly sought-after remedies. As the plague decimated traditional healers, you assist the priest with parish records. Your literacy and quick intellect make you valuable in a community where such skills are scarce. In the old world, your peasant birth would have limited your prospects regardless of your abilities. In the post-plague world, where social boundaries are fluid and talent is urgently sought, opportunities abound. One evening, as your family shares a meal more abundant than you anticipated during the pre-plague years, your father tentatively voices a widely held thought. "It is a terrible statement," he begins. "Yet for those who survived, life is improved." Your mother nods slowly. "More food, better pay, more freedom," she agrees. Built on countless graves, this is the uncomfortable paradox at the heart of the post-plague world. For those fortunate enough to survive, whether by genetic luck like your brother's, circumstantial fortune, or simple isolation from infection sources, the new world offers advantages the old one never could. The drastic population decrease offers prospects for social progress, economic growth, and personal liberty that were unimaginable in the dense, strictly stratified society before the plague. However, these gains carry an incalculable price. The lives of millions, the fracturing of families and communities, and the loss of knowledge and culture among those who held it are all casualties. No survivor can fully appreciate their enhanced situation without the haunting presence of this knowledge. As you drift to sleep that night, you ponder the future. Though the plague has receded, no one is certain it is gone forever. It will surely return, bringing fresh waves of death. Nevertheless, humanity will endure, adapting to each outbreak, developing new responses, and slowly accumulating the knowledge that will eventually defeat this unseen foe centuries later. What you are unaware of is that you stand at a historical turning point. The world emerging from the Black Death will be fundamentally altered. Seeds of the Renaissance are being sown in these years of recovery, as the rigid feudal system slowly declines. The unquestioned authority of traditional secular and religious power structures has been shaken. At a biological level, the plague has fundamentally reshaped the human species, selecting for genetic traits that will dictate health and disease resistance for future generations. Your brother's survival is not simply personal luck, but an evolutionary chapter in humanity's ongoing struggle with the microscopic life that both sustains and endangers us. Tomorrow, as a new day dawns on your changed world, you will continue the work of rebuilding, adapting, and finding a way forward. This is what plague survivors have always done throughout history. They carry the weight of memory while facing the future. In doing so, they reshape the world in ways that will echo through centuries to come. The saga of survival we have followed through the 14th century Black Death is far from the sole account of courage and genetic fortune in humanity's long struggle against plague. As sleep descends, let us travel forward through time to a different village, a separate outbreak, and another remarkable story of sacrifice and endurance. 3 centuries have elapsed since the initial devastating waves of the Black Death ravaged Europe. It is now the summer of 1665, and we find ourselves in Arm, a small village situated in the picturesque hills of Derbyshire, England. Arm, pronounced like M, is a peaceful community of about 800 inhabitants, mostly farmers and lead miners who exploit the rich veins running beneath the limestone terrain. Life here adheres to the familiar rhythms of rural England. As dawn breaks, villagers cultivate their fields and livestock, engage in local industries, attend services at St. Lawrence Parish, and gather at the tavern to exchange news and fellowship. This is a tight-knit community where all know one another, where families have resided for generations, and where neighborly care has been forged through shared joys and struggles. What the people of Arm do not know is that they are about to face the greatest test imaginable, one that will write their village name into history and enshrine their collective sacrifice in legend. The plague has returned to England. In London, the disease known to people as the Black Death, now understood as bubonic plague, is carving a deadly path through the capital's crowded streets. By completion, it will kill an estimated 100,000 Londoners, almost a quarter of the city's population. This outbreak will be recognized as the Great Plague of London, England's final major epidemic of bubonic plague. For now, the villages of Am feel safe in their isolation. The plague is a city issue, they believe, unlikely to reach their remote community in the Derbyshire Hills, far from major trade routes and urban centres. But destiny has other intentions. In late August 1665, a package arrived in AAM addressed to the local tailor Alexander Hadfield. It contained a bundle of cloth from London, possibly designs for the latest fashions or fabrics unavailable locally. Hadfield's assistant, George Vicars, who was lodging with the tailor and his family, unpacked the parcel. The cloth felt damp after its long journey. So Vicars hung it by the fire to dry, unknowingly releasing the deadly cargo within its folds. He fled, carrying the plague bacterium, Yinia pestis. Within days, George Vicars fell ill with a raging fever. The telltale buboes, swollen, painful lymph nodes, appeared in his neck and armpits. The village watched in horror as this strong young man rapidly deteriorated. By September 7, 1665, Vicars was dead, the first plague victim in AAM. Panic sweeps the community as sickness spreads. By September's end, 4 more AAM residents had died, all from homes near Vicars' lodging. The plague has established a hold. As autumn advances, the crisis intensifies, more villages fall ill, and mortality rates rise. Some families lose several members in quick succession. Gravediggers struggle to handle the escalating deaths. The natural response is flight. In London, those who could afford to do so, including King Charles II and his court, had escaped the plague-ridden city for safer country retreats. The affluent residents of AM2 are now preparing to depart, seeking refuge in uninfected regions until the danger subsides. It is at this crucial juncture that 2 men present an extraordinary offer, one that will save innumerable lives outside the village while condemning many inhabitants to near certain death. William Meeson, the new rector of IAM, and his predecessor Thomas Stanley set aside their religious differences. Meeson, representing the established Church of England, and Stanley, following the Puritan tradition, proposed a unified plan for the village to voluntarily quarantine itself. No one will leave and no one will enter. This measure will contain the plague within their boundaries, preventing its spread to neighboring communities at grave risk. It is a staggering request. Essentially, the villagers are being asked to sacrifice themselves so that many more of them will die protecting strangers in nearby areas. Remarkably, they comply. The village boundary transforms into a quarantine line, a boundary between life and death that no resident of AM will cross. Food and supplies are left by outsiders, especially the Earl of Devonshire of Chatsworth House, who promises to care for the isolated villagers. Money for these provisions is placed in vinegar-filled holes in the rocks, as it is thought vinegar will disinfect the coins. This event is one of the most poignant and heroic episodes in humanity's long history of battling infectious disease. As the seasons cycle, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, and winter to spring, the plague relentlessly advances within the confines of AAM. Entire families are decimated. Children are orphaned only to perish shortly thereafter. Houses remain vacant, their occupants hastily interred in gardens and fields as the churchyard fills. Amidst this devastation, individual narratives unfold, revealing the extraordinary scope of human courage, suffering, and survival. Elizabeth Hancock, a farmer's wife at Riley Farm, on the village's edge, endures an almost incomprehensible loss. In just 8 days during August 1666, the plague takes her husband and 6 children. With no aid, neighbors fear the infected household. Elizabeth alone drags each body to a nearby field and buries them herself. The remarkable element of Elizabeth's story is not only her incredible strength in the face of such profound personal loss, it is the fact that despite caring for her entire family, including those afflicted by the plague, she never contracts the disease herself. Similar to the survivors in our earlier tale, Elizabeth likely possesses the CCR5 delta 32 genetic mutation, which provides immunity to the plague bacterium. The Riley Graves, as they are known, remain a testament to one woman's suffering and endurance. Another extraordinary story is that of Marshall Howe, AIM's unofficial gravedigger. As the death toll increases, Howe undertakes the grim task of burial, not from noble sacrifice, but for mercenary reasons. He seizes the opportunity to loot the homes of the dead before disposing of their bodies. Despite this unsavory conduct, Howe's story includes an element of medical mystery. He deals with dozens, possibly hundreds of infected corpses. He enters plague-ridden houses that others avoid at all costs. Logically, he should be among the first to die. Yet Marshall Howe survives the entire outbreak without ever showing symptoms of the disease. Modern science suggests a likely explanation, a protective genetic mutation that prevents the plague bacterium from entering his cells. The supposed luck or divine protection attributed to him is actually the result of a minute alteration in his DNA, granting him an advantage in humanity's evolutionary struggle against microscopic adversaries. This is juxtaposed with the heartbreaking story of Emmett Seidel and Roland Tora, young lovers separated by a village quarantine. Emmett remains within AAM, while Roland is from an adjacent village outside the cordon. As the quarantine takes hold, they are suddenly and indefinitely separated. Unwilling to sever all contact, they agreed to meet at a safe distance across Cucklet Dell, a natural ravine that forms part of the village boundary. Standing far apart to prevent any risk of infection transmission, they could at least see each other and exchange words of comfort and devotion. These brief, distant meetings sustained them through the early months of the quarantine. As spring turned to summer in 1666 and the plague reached its peak intensity in Am, Emmett ceased visiting their meeting place. Roland continued to appear daily, calling her name but receiving no reply. Only when the quarantine finally ended did Roland learn the truth. Emmett died in April, one of many young victims claimed by the plague. Their love story, cut short by disease, yet marked by faithful devotion, remains one of IAM's most enduring legends. Perhaps the strangest story is that of Margaret Blackwell, who fell gravely ill with plague symptoms and was left for dead by her brother Francis. In her fevered state, Margaret desperately sought water in the kitchen and mistook a container of bacon fat for milk. She drank deeply from the greasy liquid. To everyone's surprise, Margaret recovered. For centuries, villagers have told the story of how bacon fat cured the plague, but the truth is likely more complex. Margaret likely possessed the genetic resistance we discussed and would have recovered regardless of her unconventional drink. Yet the legend endured, highlighting the desperate search for any cure from the plague's deadly hold. Amidst this, the village's religious leaders offered their limited comfort. William Merson, who advocated for quarantine with Thomas Stanley, suffered a terrible personal cost for his brave defiance. His wife, Catherine, contracted the plague while caring for sick villages and died in her husband's arms in August 1666, at the outbreak's height. Mizon describes himself afterward as a dying man, though he physically survives. In a letter to his children sent away before the quarantine, he writes, "The condition of this place is very sad. I entreat you to fly this place. I am not in a condition to receive comfort from you. I am so weak I can write no more." Despite his grief, he continues to minister to his suffering congregation until the end. Church services relocate outdoors to Cucklet Dell as fresh air is thought to reduce contagion risk. Villagers pray while standing far apart, an early form of social distancing. Even in the darkest hours, when death seems to lurk in every shadow, the community maintains its spiritual practices, finding solace in familiar rituals even as the world collapses around them. Not everyone behaves solely. Of course, there are instances of looting, of neighbors refusing to help one another, of panic overriding compassion. One villager, Mary Cooper, attempts to break the quarantine, fleeing toward the safety of Sheffield before being caught and returned to IAM. But these lapses are exceptions. The dominant narrative of IAM is one of extraordinary collective sacrifice for the greater good. By the time the plague concludes in November 1666, it has ravaged AAM for 14 months. Of the roughly 800 villages present when the outbreak began, only about 340 survive. Entire family lines are eliminated. The village's social structure is fractured with wounds that will take generations to heal. Nevertheless, their sacrifice is justified. The plague is contained within AAM's borders. Surrounding communities, which likely would have been infected if the villagers had fled, are spared the devastation. Thousands of lives are saved by the deliberate decision of a few hundred to face death instead of spreading it. In the quiet aftermath, as survivors begin rebuilding their shattered community, they remain unaware of the legacy they have forged. They cannot imagine that 3.5 centuries later, Their story will still be recounted as an example of extraordinary communal courage and sacrifice. They cannot know that the plague that devastated their village was the final major outbreak of bubonic plague in England. The specific strain of Yersinia pestis that caused the plague in the 1660s likely made it less viable in later years, or improvements in sanitation and housing would gradually reduce rat populations that spread the disease. They cannot know that future scientists will deeply investigate their descendants, discovering unusually high rates of the CCR5 delta 32 mutation among people whose family lines trace back to AAM survivors. Stronger evidence exists regarding how infectious diseases shape human evolution through natural selection. They cannot know that their example will resonate with special poignancy in the early 21st century when a global pandemic once again forces communities worldwide to make difficult choices about isolation, quarantine, and collective sacrifice for the common good. All they know is that they have survived an ordeal almost beyond comprehension. Having witnessed the deaths of neighbors, friends, and family in the dozens, they have endured self-imposed isolation through summer heat and winter cold, fear, grief, and unimaginable loss. Now, as the plague finally grips their village, they must find a way to continue living. The survivors of AIM immediately face practical challenges. Fields are untended, businesses have collapsed, and housing is in disrepair. The shattering of numerous traditional family structures has left orphans needing homes and widows and widowers facing decisions about remarriage. Property ownership is complicated when entire families are eliminated. Nevertheless, the human capacity for resilience, evident in our plague narratives, reasserts itself. New families emerge from the remnants of those destroyed by disease. Distant relatives reclaim abandoned property and revitalize the depleted village. Those with valuable skills are highly sought after, commanding increased compensation. The plague functioned as a severe yet effective form of natural selection. Survivors, through genetic resistance, chance, or a mix of factors, form the basis for the village's renewal. Their descendants will inherit the genetic legacy of plague resistance, though they will not comprehend this inheritance for centuries. For some survivors, the psychological scars never fully heal. Elizabeth Hancock, who interred her entire family herself, remarries and has more children, yet villagers report she is never quite the same. At times, a distant look enters her eyes, as if she has seen ghosts from that terrible week when death claimed everyone she loved. Marshall Howe, the unscrupulous gravedigger who survived against all odds, finds himself somewhat ostracized despite his apparent immunity. The villagers remember his looting of the dead, and while his services were necessary during the crisis, peace brings a reckoning with his behavior. Grief-stricken by the loss of his beloved wife, William Merson departed AAM in 1669 for a new post. He later remarried and lived to 71. Yet his correspondence reveals he never forgot the horror of the plague months or the sacrifice of his Catherine. As for the village, AAM gradually recovered its population, although some family names vanished entirely from its records. The quarantine evolves into local law, a narrative inherited across generations marked by both pride and grief. In the 19th century, as Victorian England developed a keen interest in significant historical events, AAM's story is rediscovered and popularized. The plague village, as it is known, begins to attract visitors curious about its tragic history. The Riley graves, the boundary stones, and other physical remains of the quarantine transform into informal monuments. By the 21st century, AAM is a well-established stop on heritage tourism routes through Derbyshire. The village museum recounts the story of the plague and quarantine. The parish church exhibits artifacts and commemorations. An annual Plague Sunday service has been held since 1866, honoring the community's sacrifice. Yet, AAM is more than just a historical site. It remains a living community where descendants of plague survivors still reside. Some share surnames with those who survived the 1665-66 outbreak. The Hancocks, the Siddles, the Blackwells, and genetic testing has shown they still possess the CCR5 delta 32 mutation, which may have protected their ancestors from the plague. The story of AAM illustrates that history is not merely dates and events to memorize, it is the lived experience of real people confronting extraordinary circumstances. Those whose choices, sacrifices, and survival shaped the world we inhabit today. As the soft darkness of sleep envelops you more deeply, carry with you the image of village as it is now, peaceful, picturesque, with its stone cottages and flower gardens, offering little hint of the tragedy that once unfolded there. Yet the past remains present in the memorial plaques on the preserved boundary stones and in the carefully tended Riley graves on the hillside. The villagers who chose isolation, aware that many would perish, could not have foreseen how long their story would persist or how significant it would remain for future generations. They acted out of immediate concern for their neighbors, not historical legacy. Perhaps this is what makes their sacrifice so powerful. It was done without expectation of recognition or reward, simply because it was the right thing to do. In a world prioritizing individual gain over group well-being, AAM highlights humanity's capacity for exceptional selflessness when circumstances require it. Tomorrow night, we will examine how plague outbreaks reshaped the world, how societies rebuilt, how power structures shifted, and how the biological legacy of plague resistance still affects human health today. For now, let the courage of Arms villages guide you into dreams, a quiet testament to humanity's capacity for sacrifice, survival, and hope. Let us journey to the aftermath of the 14th century Black Death. While Arms' story from the 1660s reveals a single village's courage, the great pandemic of the 1300s reshaped entire societies. As we explore this historical landscape, let's examine how surviving such catastrophe altered the medieval world. Imagine yourself once more in that small village we visited earlier, but now it is 1352. The initial waves of plague have finally subsided, leaving a transformed landscape, both physical and social. As you walk through the village that was once home to 200 souls, you count perhaps 90 people remaining. Empty cottages stand like hollow-eyed skulls along the lane, their thatched roofs beginning to collapse without maintenance, and their gardens overgrown with weeds. Yet amidst this desolation, subtle shifts are emerging. These changes will ultimately reshape the foundations of medieval society. In the surrounding fields, the transformation is evident. Prior to the plague, every piece of land was farmed, even marginal soils that provided meager harvests. Population growth over generations had forced farming onto less productive areas as people struggled to feed expanding families. With so many dead, land has suddenly become abundant. Survivors abandoned the least fertile fields, focusing their labor on the best soils. This simple shift dramatically improves crop yields per person, as a family that once struggled to feed itself after taxes and tithes now often harvests a surplus. For those who survived the apocalyptic mortality, food is now more plentiful than in living memory. After centuries of existing on the edge of hunger, this abundance feels miraculous, a small compensation for the emotional devastation of losing so many family members and neighbors. Dietary changes are imminent. Before the plague, most peasants subsisted primarily on grain, bread, porridge, and ale formed the bulk of their nutrition, with meat being a rare luxury. Now, with fewer mouths to feed and more land available, many convert fields to pasture for raising animals. Meat, cheese, and butter are more commonly found on simple tables. As diets improve, the average population height, previously falling due to poor nutrition, starts to rise again. However, the most significant shifts occur in the dynamic between laborers and landowners. The substantial population decline, affecting nearly half of Europe's people, results in a severe labor shortage. There is still work requiring completion. Fields must be plowed, crops harvested, cloth woven, and buildings repaired. However, there simply aren't enough hands to complete all the necessary work. For surviving peasants and artisans, this new reality grants unprecedented leverage. Consider Thomas Fletcher, a ploughman in your village. Before the plague, he worked the fields 6 days a week in exchange for a small plot of land to farm for himself and his family. If he complained or refused to provide the required labor service, dozens of other hungry peasants were ready to take his place. Now, with half the village's workers dead, the local man's steward approaches Thomas with an extraordinary offer: a larger plot of land, a reduction in labor service from 6 days to 3, and the freedom to work for wages elsewhere if he desires. The steward offers this not out of generosity, but necessity. Without Thomas's skilled ploughing, fields will lie fallow, and everyone, including the lord of the manor, will suffer. Similar scenes unfold across Europe. Peasants bound to the land for generations suddenly gain options. Some landlords offer freedom from servitude as a way to retain workers. Others change labor obligations to simple rent, letting peasants farm as they wish if they pay the agreed fee. Skilled workers, like masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, and weavers, experience even greater changes due to desperate demand for their services. Wages for these workers increased by double, triple, or even quadruple in the years after the plague. A skilled carpenter, once barely sustaining his family, now builds a two-room house with glass windows, wears finer clothes, and eats meat thrice weekly. These shifts frighten the nobility and wealthy merchants who witness the traditional social structure collapsing as former serfs demand improved treatment and common laborers live like the minor gentry. Throughout Europe, authorities tried to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and compel workers to return to their former conditions. In England, this involved the Ordinance of Labourers in 1349 and the subsequent more extensive Statute of Labourers in 1351. These regulations barred employers from paying wages exceeding those before the plague, prevented workers from migrating to seek better opportunities, and aimed to stabilize prices for necessities like food and other commodities. Similar legislation exists across Europe. France enacted wage controls in 1351, and so did the city-state of Florence. The Kingdom of Castile attempted to restrict peasant mobility with its own labor laws, but these efforts largely failed. The labor shortage was simply too severe and economic pressures too great. Enforcement proved nearly impossible in rural areas, where local officials, often reliant on good relations with the remaining workers, frequently ignored violations. Workers devise creative means to evade wage restrictions. A carpenter limited to a set daily wage might accept gifts of food, clothing, or shelter beyond his official pay. A farm laborer might work slowly or sloppily unless offered terms superior to the law. For those upholding the laws, the calculations are harsh. Before the plague, a lord might have had 100 peasants on his land. Now he has 50 or fewer. Punishing a worker with imprisonment or fines only exacerbates labor shortages. Furthermore, harsh treatment of workers may cause them to leave, despite legal restrictions on such mobility, as they will seek employment elsewhere. This crisis intensified during various peasant revolts across Europe, culminating in the Jacquerie Rebellion in 1358, where peasants in the Paris region attacked castles and noble estates. Though brutally suppressed, it showcases the rising confidence of the working classes. In England, tensions built for decades until 1381, when they erupted in the Peasants' Revolt. Led by Wat, Tyler, Jack Straw, and a radical priest named John Ball, tens of thousands of commoners marched on London, demanding an end to serfdom, the abolition of the hated poll tax, and greater social equality. John Ball's famous sermon encapsulates the revolutionary spirit of the time. When Adam and Eve were born, who was then the gentleman? He asks rhetorically, questioning the very notion of aristocratic privilege. From the outset, all men were created equal, and our servitude arose from the unjust oppression of wicked men. Although the English revolt, like the Jacquerie, was eventually crushed by a blend of false promises and brutal force, it signifies a deep change in awareness. Peasants, once accepting their subordinate status as divinely ordained, now openly challenge the social hierarchy. Workers who previously had no choice but to accept offered terms now demand improved treatment as their rightful entitlement. These economic and social shifts after the plague are not confined to the countryside. Towns and cities also undergo significant transformations. Urban centers, in particular, suffered exceptionally high death rates during the pandemic due to their densely packed conditions. Florence, a major medieval European city, suffers a population loss of up to 75%. This catastrophe creates opportunities for those who remain. Housing, once scarce and costly in prosperous cities, suddenly becomes plentiful and affordable. Apprentices advance to master status much sooner than usual as guilds lose senior members. Women, traditionally barred from many jobs, enter trades vacated by deceased male relatives. Consider the tale of Margareta, a widow weaver in a small market town. Prior to the plague, she could assist her husband in his workshop, but was barred from operating as an independent artisan by guild rules forbidding women from owning weaving businesses. Now, with her husband's death from the plague and the tools, loom, and expertise he left her, the weakened Weavers Guild faces a dilemma: to enforce the ban on female members and lose a skilled practitioner, or to adapt to the new reality. Faced with declining membership and increased demand for cloth, the Guild admitted Margarita as a full member, one of numerous similar compromises across Europe where necessity superseded tradition. Although such opportunities for women would eventually diminish as populations recovered several generations after the plague, women benefited from expanded economic roles previously unimaginable before the pandemic. The plague's aftermath also brought about shifts in fashion, art, and architecture. The massive death toll fostered a new awareness of death's certainty and life's fragility. The macabre became an artistic theme, featuring skeletal figures, skulls, and depictions of the dance of death, where skeletons guided people from all social strata to the grave. However, this morbid interest was balanced by a celebration of life and its pleasures. Survivors, aware of existence's fragility, embraced luxury and beauty with renewed appreciation. Among those who could afford it, clothing grew more elaborate and colorful. The drab, practical garments of earlier medieval periods gave way to rich fabrics, bold designs, and status-signifying styles. The nobility, fearing commoners dressing above their station, attempted to enforce sumptuary laws dictating attire for each social class. These edicts, such as wage controls, are largely unenforceable. A prosperous artisan's wife might technically be forbidden from wearing silk, but if she can afford it, who in her community possesses both the authority and the motivation to prevent it? Religious attitudes are also transforming. The Church, which once governed medieval intellectual and spiritual life, is now facing an authority crisis. Many priests and monks abandoned their duties during the plague, leaving their congregations unprotected when spiritual solace was most required. Others perished, resulting in parishes lacking leadership. Monasteries, due to their communal living, experienced extremely high death rates, erasing centuries of accumulated knowledge and tradition. Furthermore, the plague presents difficult theological inquiries. If the disaster is divine punishment, as many church authorities maintain, why do both the virtuous and the sinful perish? Why do devout monks die while seemingly impious laypeople survive? If prayer and penance are the remedies, why do outbreaks frequently strike monasteries most severely? Traditional theology offers no satisfying explanations. Consequently, two divergent religious trends emerge. Some survivors embrace even greater religious devotion, viewing their survival as proof of divine favor that calls for grateful worship. Others adopt a more skeptical questioning stance toward religious leaders who fail to explain or lessen the disaster. This critical spirit, coupled with economic shifts that afford common people greater resources and free time, fosters the intellectual growth that would eventually become the Renaissance. When fewer hands are needed for society's necessities, more minds can pursue art, philosophy, science, and literature. Education, once limited primarily to the clergy and nobility, gradually becomes accessible to a broader segment of society. Newly wealthy merchants and artisans desire for their children to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic skills, beneficial for commerce and indicators of ascending social standing. Small schools emerge in towns and larger villages, offering practical knowledge alongside religious teaching. The plague's demographic shock also spurs technological innovation. With scarce and expensive labor, methods that conserve human effort become highly valued. Watermills, long used for grinding grain, were adapted for new uses, powering bellows for blast furnaces, driving hammers for metalworking, fulling cloth, and printing technology. This will eventually revolutionize the spread of knowledge across Europe, receiving early impetus from the post-plague labor shortage. Handwritten manuscripts, which required months of a skilled scribe's time, became prohibitively expensive as such workers could command premium wages. The economic need for mechanical alternatives spurred the development of movable type printing in the mid-15th century. More significantly, the plague fundamentally challenged medieval Europe's acceptance of static tradition, as the death of half the population caused social hierarchies to collapse and reform, and previously unquestioned authorities failed to offer protection or explanation. The notion that the world must remain unchanged diminishes in influence. Following the Black Death, more people could conceive of alternatives to current systems, different methods for organizing labor, allocating resources, or structuring authority. Although many of these alternatives are never achieved, those that are implemented often prove temporary. But the psychological resistance to change itself lessens, allowing room for the innovations in thought, technology, art, and social organization that would eventually transform medieval Europe into the early modern world. For those living through these shifts, the experience focuses less on grand historical shifts and more on practical daily adjustments. Thomas the Ploughman, for example, doesn't contemplate the decline of feudalism. He contemplates negotiating better terms with Mr. Steward so his family can eat better than before. Margarita the Weaver does not view herself as part of a gender revolution. She is simply using her skills to support herself after losing her husband. Yet, these individual adaptations, multiplied across millions of survivors throughout Europe, collectively reshape society. As water gradually erodes stone, the numerous small decisions made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances erode and eventually transform the seemingly solid structures of medieval life. Not all these changes are immediately positive. For instance, the labor shortage that benefits workers causes hardship for many landowners. Some estates fail completely as their owners cannot adapt to the new economic realities. Churches, monasteries, and charitable institutions reliant on stable rents and donations faced operational difficulties due to reduced income. Criminality rose in some regions as unsupervised young men with increased wealth indulged in alcohol and encountered trouble. Abandoned rural properties occasionally served as hideouts for outlaws, and urban authorities worried about maintaining order with dwindling watch forces. For decades following the initial plague outbreak, recurring smaller epidemics continued to strike European communities, hindering population recovery and solidifying the economic and social shifts initiated by the first pandemic. It was not until the late 15th century that Europe's population began sustained growth again, and it took until the 17th century to reach pre-plague levels in many areas. This extended demographic decline allows the changes initiated by the Black Death to become firmly established. What began as temporary disruptions eventually become new norms as population pressure begins to reverse some of the economic advantages for common workers. Other facets of medieval society have been permanently altered. For the peasant family, we have followed their story through the decades after the plague, which brought gradual improvement. Your brother, miraculously surviving the disease, eventually takes over a neighboring farm left vacant by a family with no survivors. What was previously impossible, a peasant accumulating a significant landholding, becomes achievable in the depopulated countryside. Your father, whose carpentry skills are highly sought after, secures a contract to help rebuild the local church, damaged by years of neglect during the plague years. The payment he receives enables him to add a second room to your family's cottage and replace the dirt floor with wooden planks. These are small luxuries unimaginable in the pre-plague era. Your mother teaches you and your sister to read, a skill she acquired as a servant before marriage. Such knowledge would have held little practical value for peasant children before the plague. In the shifting world of the late 14th century, literacy grants access to opportunities previously barred to the unprivileged. One autumn evening, as your family gathers by the hearth after the day's labor, your father utters words unthinkable a generation prior. Perhaps you could be a cleric, he suggests, nodding slowly. The abbey requires someone capable of reading and writing for their records. The compensation will be sufficient, and the labor is not physically demanding. Your brother laughs, not unkindly. A cleric from our family. What would grandfather say to that? The notion of a peasant's child entering such work would have seemed absurd to earlier generations, for whom rigid social boundaries appeared as natural and immovable as the stars. But as you fall asleep that night, the possibility settles in your mind not as an outlandish dream, but as a genuine opportunity. This perhaps is the most significant legacy of the Black Death. Beyond just immediate shifts in wages, working conditions, and social structures, this involves expanding the scope of what ordinary people can envision for themselves and their children. As dawn nears and this phase of our history concludes, we leave you in this moment of possibility. Your world was shattered by unimaginable loss, then slowly reconstructed into something distinct from what preceded it. The medieval certainties that once governed life have been questioned, challenged and overturned. As a survivor of these changes, you are at a pivotal moment in Western history. The adaptations, innovations, and reconsiderations necessitated by the plague will eventually contribute to the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the emergence of the modern world. This is a narrative reserved for our final night, where we will explore how the long shadow of the Black Death extends across centuries, influencing art, science, medicine, and society in ways that still shape our world today. As our journey through the world of plague survivors concludes, let us broaden our perspective to observe how the ripples from the Black Death continue to spread through time, subtly and profoundly shaping the world. The memory of this medieval disaster still affects us today in our bodies, societies, and our view of illness. Let us start with the most striking legacy, the biological inheritance passed down by those who survived the plague. Recall the CCR5 Delta 32 mutation we discussed. This genetic anomaly that safeguarded some medieval Europeans from the plague. This minute DNA difference persisted even after the plague receded. Passed down through generations, it was enriched in the European gene pool because carriers were more likely to survive and reproduce. Fast forward 6 centuries to the late 20th century, when a new pandemic emerged, HIV/AIDS, killing millions globally. As medical researchers raced to understand the disease, they made a startling discovery. Some individuals appeared naturally resistant to HIV infection despite repeated exposure. Further investigation uncovers the reason many possess the CCR5 Delta 32 mutation, the same genetic variation that aided their ancestors' survival during the Black Death. This link clarifies when scientists grasp how both diseases function. Both the plague bacterium and HIV utilize the CCR5 protein as an entry point into human cells. The Delta 32 mutation modifies this protein, effectively blocking the pathway these pathogens attempt to use. A genetic adaptation selected by a 14th-century deadly disease unexpectedly offers protection against a 20th-century threat. This finding guided the development of new HIV drugs that block the CCR5 receptor, mimicking the mutation's natural function. In effect, medieval plague survivors have aided modern life, their genetic heritage providing a vital key in combating an unforeseen disease. However, the biological impact of the plague extended beyond this single mutation. The Black Death functioned as a powerful force of natural selection, potentially affecting other aspects of the immune system in Europeans. Today's population is disproportionately derived from the survivors, individuals whose bodies, due to various genetic factors, could better resist the attack of Yersinia pestis. Some scientists hypothesize that autoimmune diseases, more prevalent in European populations where the immune system attacks the body's own tissues, may be an unintended result of this selection. Our ancestors endured the plague because their immune responses were especially strong. That heightened reactivity, however, could predispose their descendants to conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, where the immune system becomes overactive. These biological links between the past and present show that pandemics don't just kill and disappear from history. They alter the genetic composition of the survivors, causing changes that remain for centuries or even millennia after the immediate crisis ends. The social and economic shifts caused by the Black Death were equally enduring. Though the immediate aftermath, labor shortages, wage increases, and social mobility we explored last night eventually faded as Europe's population recovered, certain fundamental changes became permanent. Consider the institution of serfdom, which had bound peasants to the land for generations before the plague. This system never fully recovered from the disruption caused by the Black Death in Western Europe. Despite landlords' efforts to reinstate older restrictions, demographic circumstances proved unfavorable. Land remained relatively plentiful and labor scarce for centuries, granting workers leverage that slowly diminished feudal obligations. By the close of the Middle Ages, serfdom had largely vanished from England, France, and the Low Countries, substituted by diverse rental systems that permitted significantly greater personal liberty. Peasants continued to work the land, but increasingly as tenants paying rent instead of as serfs, bound by hereditary obligations of labor and subservience. Eastern Europe followed a different course. There, the nobility succeeded in reimposing and even strengthening serfdom after the plague. creating what historians term the second serfdom that endured into the 19th century. The difference between Western and Eastern European social systems, one advancing toward greater freedom for the common people and the other toward stricter control, would profoundly shape subsequent development in these regions. Furthermore, the Black Death accelerated fundamental changes in religious life, as the Catholic Church, which had dominated medieval intellectual and spiritual life, faced challenges to its authority after the plague. Questions concerning why prayers remained unanswered, why religious processions failed to halt the disease, and why devout monks perished with sinners fractured the foundation of unquestioning faith. These fissures would deepen in subsequent centuries. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, challenging Catholic authority and stressing individual scriptural interpretation, exploited a populace already inclined to doubt religious orthodoxy. While the Reformation had many causes, historians see echoes of plague-era disillusionment in the willingness of millions to break with centuries of tradition. Even art and literature were transformed by the Black Death experience. Medieval artwork often focused on religious themes depicting biblical stories, saints' lives, and divine figures. After the plague, new motifs emerged, such as the Dance of Death, which depicted skeletons leading people from all social classes to the grave. Mortality in still life paintings reflected a shift toward the human experience over purely divine matters. This move toward humanism, focusing on human experience, emotion, and achievement, flourished in the Renaissance, supported by the rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman knowledge. This human-centered perspective fundamentally reshaped how Europeans perceived themselves and their world, an impact evidenced even in the effects of the plague on language. Our contemporary English vocabulary still reflects the experience of the Black Death. We use terms like quarantine, derived from the Italian quarantina giorni, the duration ships needed to remain isolated in Venetian harbors during plague outbreaks. We also describe a deadline, which originated as a line marking the boundary of a prison, yet conceptually relates to the boundaries established for quarantined plague zones. Even seemingly harmless childhood rhymes might hold plague memories. Phrases like "ring around the rosy," "pocketful of posies," "ashes," "ashes, we all fall down" have been interpreted by some as referencing plague symptoms. This includes the rosy rash, attempted remedies, sweet-smelling posies used to ward off disease, and ashes from cremation falling during death. Although scholars debate this interpretation, it reveals how deeply plague imagery is embedded in cultural memory. The Black Death fundamentally altered humanity's perception of disease. Prior to the plague, illness was typically viewed as divine retribution or an imbalance of bodily humors, with little understanding of contagion. However, the plague's clear pattern of spread, moving along trade routes through close personal contact, made it impossible to disregard the contagious nature of some diseases. Communities devised practical responses, though not based on germ theory yet emerging in the 19th century, that nonetheless incorporated effective public health measures. Ships were quarantined, infected households isolated, plague victims and their belongings were often burned. Cities established public health boards with extraordinary powers during outbreaks, setting principles of epidemic management that influenced public health practices for centuries. These pragmatic methods, born from bitter experience rather than scientific knowledge, saved countless lives during later plague outbreaks. By the time the final major European plague epidemic reached Marseille in 1720, authorities had developed and implemented cordons, sanitaries, strict quarantines, and careful monitoring, which successfully restricted the outbreak primarily to that city and its vicinity. These measures arrived too late for the millions who died in the initial pandemic. Yet the knowledge acquired from the Black Death experience helped reduce subsequent plague outbreaks and guided responses to other epidemics. When cholera affected Europe in the 19th century, public health officials utilized plague management traditions to imperfectly contain its spread initially, but with growing scientific understanding, these methods became more effective. The plague's legacy persists in modern pandemic management. Many contemporary strategies, such as quarantines, travel restrictions, contact tracing, and isolation, originate from methods developed centuries ago in response to the Black Death. Even the conflict between economic consequences and public health policies reflects medieval discussions about closing city gates and markets during plague outbreaks. Perhaps most profoundly, the Black Death altered how humans conceptualized catastrophe. Medieval Europeans inhabited a world where sudden disaster felt constant. War, famine, and minor diseases frequently took lives. Yet the plague's scale and swiftness exceeded anything in living memory or recorded history. This confrontation with near-apocalyptic mortality necessitated a collective psychological adjustment. Communities that endured learned they could withstand previously unimaginable loss and persist. Individuals found reserves of resilience they never knew they held. Societies developed institutional memory and adaptive practices for future crises. This capacity for resilience amid catastrophe remains one of humanity's most valuable assets. Throughout history, communities have faced seemingly insurmountable disasters, yet life somehow continues. People grieve the dead, rebuild settlements, adapt methods, and advance, carrying the memory of loss while forging something new from the remnants. This pattern repeats after every major catastrophe, from the volcanic eruption that buried Pompeii and the 1755 Lisbon earthquake to the 1918 influenza pandemic and subsequent natural disasters and disease outbreaks. The Black Death stands as perhaps the most extreme historical manifestation of such calamity, yet it revealed humanity's remarkable capacity to endure, adapt, and persist. This does not diminish the suffering inflicted. The plague caused unimaginable pain, shattered families and communities, and claimed millions of unique lives, each rich with experience and potential. No subsequent social change or biological adaptation can justify such devastating loss. Understanding how humanity has survived this crisis provides insight into our capacity to manage current and future challenges. Issues like climate change, emerging diseases, and technological disruptions demonstrate that our world faces numerous existential threats. The history of the Black Death illustrates that past generations successfully navigated seemingly insurmountable crises and persisted. For the individual plague survivors whose stories we have followed these past nights, grand historical patterns would have been secondary to their immediate lived experience. Thomas the Ploughman, negotiating better working conditions in the labor-scarce aftermath, was not concerned with the long-term decline of feudalism. Elizabeth Hancock, burying her family on the hillside above Am, could not have imagined her genetic legacy might protect descendants from a 20th-century disease. Yet in total, these separate experiences and adjustments forged the vast changes that reshaped medieval society. This is how history typically functions, not solely through the deliberate choices of great leaders or major turning points, but through the cumulative impact of millions of ordinary individuals reacting to extraordinary conditions in the best way they could. As we conclude our exploration of plague survivors, what lessons can we draw from their experiences? Perhaps the most crucial is an appreciation for human resilience. The Black Death caused losses almost beyond imagining, wiping out half the population in many areas, entire families and villages. Centuries of accumulated knowledge and culture were lost with those who carried them. Yet somehow, survivors found the will to rebuild, to create new families and communities from the remnants. We might also consider how catastrophe, for all its horror, can generate possibility. The rigid social structures of medieval Europe, once seemingly immutable, proved vulnerable to disruption when demographic realities shifted. Those previously confined to fixed social roles discovered new opportunities afterward. While we avoid disaster as a catalyst for change, history demonstrates that transformation frequently arises from crisis. The plague narrative also recalls our biological link to one another and to the myriad microscopic organisms we share on Earth. The plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis, fundamentally influenced human genetics, social structures, economic systems, and cultural expressions, and its impact continues to shape our world. Other microbes have similarly played influential roles throughout history. We exist in a constant relationship with an invisible biological realm that both sustains and endangers us. Ultimately, the plague narrative provides a perspective on human mortality and vulnerability. Medieval people lived with death as a constant companion in ways most modern Westerners do not. The plague brought mortality into even sharper focus, inspiring artwork, literature, and philosophy that contemplated life's fragility and brevity. This awareness need not be morbid or depressing. Indeed, many who survived the plague embraced life with renewed appreciation. understanding firsthand how quickly and unexpectedly it could end. There is wisdom in this perspective, not a fearful obsession with death, but a clear-eyed recognition of life's preciousness precisely because it is limited and uncertain. As our story ends and sleep approaches, imagine once more that medieval village we first visited, now a generation after the plague has passed. The population has begun to recover with new children playing in the streets and young families occupying cottages that stood empty for years. The survivors, now elders, hold the memory of what transpired, both the horrors they endured and the changes they facilitated afterward. They could not have known how their experience would resonate through centuries, impacting everything from genetic inheritance and social structures to artistic expression and public health approaches. They lived their lives to the best of their ability within unchosen circumstances, showcasing that remarkable human capacity for adaptation and perseverance that has guided our species through countless challenges. Perhaps this is the most comforting thought for dreams, that we, like those who survived plagues, hold reserves of resilience and adaptability we may not realize until circumstances test us. That life, despite its fragility, persistently strives to continue, rebuild, and forge new roots when previous ones are obstructed. Survivors of the Black Death could never have conceived of our world, with its medical advancements, instant global communication, and scientific grasp of the pathogen that inflicted their agony. Similarly, we cannot fully picture the world our descendants will inhabit in the future. Like our medieval ancestors, we advance bearing both the scars of past disasters and the lessons learned from surviving them, contributing in ways both minor and significant to the developing human narrative. Sleep well, knowing you are part of this long continuum of human experience, linked to those who came before and those yet to come. Each generation confronts its own set of challenges. Each finding endures, adapts, and continues the remarkable journey of our species through time.